Welcome back to the Clinical Athlete podcast. If you're not familiar with Clinical Athlete, we're a network of healthcare providers, students, and coaches who specialize in the management of athletes. You can find your nearest Clinical Athlete provider at clinicalathlete.com. We also have a forum where we discuss, share ideas and resources related to sports med, rehab, and performance. Forgot words. To join the forum, or for a potential listing on the Clinical Athlete directory, and for all upcoming seminars, webinars, and events, details can be found on the website. We got lots of them coming up, lots of barbell stuff and webinars and exciting stuff. This podcast can also be found on our website, along with YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and iHeartRadio. My name is Quinn Hennick. I'm a doctor of physical therapy in Orange County, California at Clinical Athlete Newport. I'm joined by Jared Maynard, who is the Clinical Athlete Continuing Education Director and Coordinator and a physiotherapist at King Physiotherapy and Foot Clinic in Ontario, Canada. He is a certified strength and conditioning specialist and runs an online powerlifting coaching company and is a competitive powerlifter himself. What's up, Jared?
Not much, man. Words are hard, so don't feel bad.
They are. There's a lot of them, and you have to say them the right way and stuff.
Yeah.
And we got John Flagg, who is an athletic trainer and wellness director at Orthopedic and Sports Physical Therapy in White Plains, Maryland. He is the powerlifting, weightlifting, and strongman coach at 301 Strong, also in White Plains, Maryland, and the owner of Rebuild Stronger, an online coaching platform for strength athletes. He is also a clinical athlete provider and the lead instructor of our newest course, the Clinical Athlete Powerlifting Certification. How you doing, John?
Doing well. It's the first time I've heard you trip over the intro.
Well, there's a first for everything.
It's all the butterflies in California right now.
Yeah, I'm nervous. Yeah, there you go. That was a good one.
That's a good one.
For the listeners who don't know, we have a wildflower boom right now and a boom in butterfly population.
Oh, lives in paradise.
That's right. And we're also joined by a very special guest for the second time now. Weightlifter, powerlifter, former collegiate golfer, aspiring chess master, Creighton physical therapy student, and Clinical Athlete Forum student member, Nate Wong. Nate, what's up, man?
Nothing much. How you guys doing?
Doing good.
Great.
It's good to have you on again.
Yeah, I'm glad to be on. I'm surprised you guys asked me to come back on again, even after my blunders the first time.
Well, you screwed it up so bad, we figured we'd give you another chance to redeem yourself.
Oh. Clinical athlete, place of second chances, huh?
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Redemption.
Nate came to us with a really awesome topic, actually, and it's the topic of how we can stay up to date with the literature. And we get questions from colleagues and students all the time. There's so much information out there. There's so many research articles being published every day. How do you find the time? How do you stay up to date and not be overwhelmed? And Nate said that they were learning about that in school currently, and we thought that would be a fantastic topic. And we said, get him on the show, because I think it would be really cool to hear that from a student's perspective as well. So, Nate, now that that's kind of fresh in your mind, have you experienced that overwhelmed feeling in regards to trying to stay up to date on literature while you're simultaneously learning how to read scientific literature, or like maybe just getting more practice with it? Because I think you had some experience with that prior. So have you had those feelings? And then number two, what have you learned in school thus far to try to help you stay up to date? What techniques are you using, practical advice, things like that?
Sure. I think the first question, it's obviously really overwhelming because we have a curriculum. We're learning a lot of the basic sciences, and not only that, some of our classes require us to go out and find literature on certain topics. So they kind of assign us topics, so they'll assign us some readings, and that kind of takes away from like me being able to ask my own questions and read what I want to read, so to speak. So it's challenging, but I find like pockets during the week and just times of that I'm free and I'll go find my own things and I think what I'm getting better at through school is kind of being able to go through a paper quickly, and I swear I'm not an abstract scientist or anything like that, but but when I'm trying to like just go through information really quickly, I'll just like read the abstract and have some questions of, methods, participants, maybe how it applies. And I'll just try to answer those questions by just quickly looking through the paper. So that's kind of one thing I've learned in school. Another thing I learned is like how to use Boolean operators. I'm still not great at it, but I can just go on like EBSCOhost or Cinol, and I'll just type in like and like something and something or something or something, and it's like different results. Cool.
And those, you capitalize those, right? All caps, or don't even have to do that?
I don't know if I'm doing it wrong, but I don't do all caps.
I think that's how
type and.
I think that's all you have to do. They always taught us all caps. I don't think it matters. But you actually bring up a really good point. So we make jokes about being abstract hunters and all these things, but the abstract is there for a reason. It gives you an idea if the article is relevant to your question, to your search question. And you make a good point. In the article itself, if you didn't read the intro of the article is really just like the narrative, setting the tone.
Right.
Or getting like background. I like to read the introduction because they a lot of times will reference articles, kind of helping to give background to the idea and the question at hand. And I like to go back and kind of get an up-to-date point. So I like to read the introduction. But if you didn't, I don't think you would lose anything from the paper necessarily. You read the objective, obviously, the purpose of the paper, and then the methods, like you said, see what they actually did. And then the results are really the meat and potatoes of the paper. The discussion is helpful because it kind of puts things into context. And again, they'll cite other literature that compares to the results of their paper, but the discussion is probably not required to know what happened in the paper. And then the conclusion is just kind of their opinions and interpretation of the paper itself. So in a bind, objective, methods, results, boom. Most people don't do that, though. I shouldn't say that, but a lot of people will actually do the opposite, and it'll be either just the abstract or it'll be like the intro and then straight to the discussion and conclusion, and they just kind of assume that the discussion meets the results that correlates and not necessarily. So I like that. In a pinch, you read what's relevant. You find the relevant articles via abstract, you read what's relevant in the paper, and then you can always come back to it and read it in more depth later on. So that's really cool.
Right. And my question is, so like when I read a paper, not all of it sticks. I don't know if that's a surprise to your listeners or anything, but like sometimes I'll like say something like, I'll read something and I'm like, oh, like I can like pull it out of nowhere and it's awesome. And other times I'll read, I'm like, man, I don't even know what I just read. And I guess my question for you guys is like, how do you guys make, things stick? When you guys read papers, does it stick more when you have like a case that you're like, or a patient, you're like, I can't figure anything out, and you read a paper about it? Does that make it stand out and stuff like that?
I would say papers stick with me more if that's my current interest. One of the things that I've figured out how to do that works for me, and it might not work for everybody, is I pick a particular interest. I do that kind of cursory search in the beginning. You can skim abstracts or however you feel like you can quickly measure the quality of a paper. Then I create a folder and I just dump everything from that subject into that folder. I read that quick scan, and then later on, I read them all the way back through. But most of the time, I'm consuming so much that's within the same vein that's how I get things to stick, because a lot of these papers stack on top of each other. I think one of the things I've learned the most over the last few years is it's the compendium of research, not one particular article, that really makes the difference. So if you see one article and another one that has the same theme or the same subject, and you start to pick out really common things, that's when it starts to stick, at least for me. So it's 5 papers in, it's 6 papers in, as opposed to reading the one, because then you start to see some of that commonality and start to understand, okay, well, this seems to be a recurring theme, and then it sticks. Right now, on the forum, Mike Amato started a predictive processing kind of starter pack. And that's one that I've been on quite a bit lately. And that's some pretty heavy stuff. And if he didn't put 10 articles in there and I just read one, then I'd have been just like you were explaining. My head would be spinning. I wouldn't really know where to go from there. But if that's the case, and this is one of those things, you look at the references at the end and you just start plucking the references and searching those articles. So for me, it's not just reading it multiple times, it's reading a lot of the same subject.
Okay. So are you talking for like randomized control trials, or are you like, I mean, because systematic reviews can pick up like a theme of like what's been going on in the last, whenever they date it.
Yeah, you can do that. You can start with an SR or like a meta-analysis, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then look through the ones they kept and read those through. Because one of the things that I think a lot of people hinge decisions on when it comes to like a meta or an SR is that they kind of assume the quality of all the selected studies is high. And sometimes that's not the case. So sometimes you have to go back and read those and say, okay, well, the methodology here wasn't great. The methodology here wasn't too great, but it at least gives you the starting point to create a bigger picture and get some of that information to stick.
I gotcha.
I think it's worth saying too that what you're just talking about there, John, is repeated exposures to these particular commonalities or these particular themes. So
taking reps.
Yeah, you're getting your reps in, right? And for the listeners, the 3 of our 6 who are kind of quivering now, thinking they have to read like 10 articles to get the gist of things, I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I mean, if you want to get a pretty good grasp on things, then yeah, you should. You kind of have to. But I know that when I read anything, it doesn't always stick. Certainly interest plays a role. If I'm interested in the topic or something about this particular paper, I'm probably paying more attention to it, and I'd probably retain more of it after, but I probably have to go through it again. Maybe not right then and there, but maybe the next day, or at some point a little bit removed, but not terribly far from it, just to be exposed to it again. Because maybe as I've been chewing on it, I think of some questions or gaps in my knowledge, and I go back looking for those answers. So I guess my point is, for anybody who's intimidated, like that's cool. We're all there. We've all been there at least. And it's not a bad thing if it doesn't stick. I think you just have to get those reps in.
And Nate, to your direct question was, does it ever happen to you guys that you read an article and you're like, what the hell did I just read? Yeah, all the time. Like every time.
Yeah.
But I think I completely agree with everything that everybody said, and I'll probably just confirm and repeat. But John, having an understanding of the body of literature on the subject, I think is huge, because you don't have to, even a systematic review, like you said, is limited to the quality of the studies that goes in there, but it's also limited to the inclusion criteria of the systematic review. So I just did a post on the Nordic hamstring curl on the forum, and I read 3 systematic reviews on the Nordic, and all 3 had different individual studies within them, because the inclusion criteria of each SR was different. So with that, as I was going through each systematic review, though, I was getting a broader understanding of the topic. And so then when I would go through the SR and I would see the same article, sometimes some of the articles included overlapped, I already had an idea in my mind about what that article was already about. So there wasn't any more background checking that I had to do. It gets easier as you become more familiar with the broader evidence on a particular topic. It gets easier for you to start running down through, because you recognize old references and you recognize things a little bit more. So it's just, you have more of a context. Anything that's new always takes forever. And when you have no context of a topic in regards to its current body of evidence, and you also have no context or very little knowledge of like statistics, every word of a research article is different and new. And like it takes you 3 hours to read an article, because literally you're looking up the definition of a word to look up the definition of another word. But it comes back to reps, and again, understanding the breadth of a particular topic, it gets easier and you just have more of an understanding. You will always have periods of time where you're like, well, what the hell is that? And you have to look it up, especially the statistics. I find people have a really hard time with that piece because they're not familiar with it, but they also don't care to learn it. And I get it; it's boring. But if you can just understand what an effect size is, or in a systematic review, when you see the forest plot, where they put all of the articles together, and you have those bars that are confidence intervals. Like sometimes those things are just hieroglyphics to some people, but if you just take 30 minutes or so and read up on what that stuff means, just like Wikipedia forest plot, Wikipedia effect size. It's not, you know what I mean? You'll get so much more out of the article, and you won't feel so overwhelmed because you'll be speaking the same language to some extent. It's like I'm sort of kind of learning Spanish, and if I try to read a Spanish kids book right now, it's going to take me 3 days to get through 10 pages. But if it was written in English, I'd get through it a lot faster. So the more familiar you can get with some of these foreign topics, the better. And the you know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
It's just repeating everything that you guys said. Yeah. You just gotta keep plugging away.
Yeah. I mean, I find myself like in a lot of like the neuroscience stuff, I'm like Googling every other word. I'm like, what does that have to do with anything? You know, because we haven't really gotten there in our curriculum yet. And I think that's why like it's good that, you know, that's why school is like really necessary, is because you have to have like a good background knowledge, a good base to kind of build off of if you're going to keep reading these papers and continue your education.
What's good about it is no one article is going to make or break a topic anyway. Mm-hmm. So you don't feel like you're wasting it because you're getting your brain reps in, but you're not retaining a ton of the articles that you're reading. Don't think that that's a waste of time, because it's not. Those articles are going to come back to you. If they're relevant to the topic, they're going to come back in some form again. You'll see them again. And then next time you come back to them, they'll be put in front of your face, because if it's an important article in the topic, it'll cross your path again at some time in the future. Yeah. And then you'll read it again. You'll be like, oh, I'm getting so much out of it now, more so than I was. It's like watching a movie for the second time. You pick up on new stuff. So you just, even if you don't understand anything, you just keep trying. And it does get easier.
Well, and this is going to be a shameless plug, but one thing that I've also noticed is that my motivations for reading it also tend to impact how much I actually retain. With the forum and the journal club and interacting with more professionals who are like-minded, who do consume a lot of literature, I feel like when I read a paper, I have to be a little bit more on my game, because I know who I'm associating with when it comes to this sort of thing. So, you know, before I was a part of that, or before I was reaching out into that, I would read, but I would read because I thought I kind of like I had to. Now I'm reading so that I can even at least try to stay up in conversation. So, you know, my motivations change as well, and that I think impacts my retention. So it's what the forums meant so much, at least in my personal development.
Nate, have you implemented anything like practically to try to get more of the literature in front of your face, automated in an automated fashion? Did they teach you that in any school, like RSS feeds, PubMed searches, these types of things?
Well, so this PowerPoint, the PowerPoint that I sent you guys, that was like it was like an in-service kind of thing. So it was optional if you wanted to go to or not. And I was like, oh shoot, I want to stay up to date when I'm, when I'm a practitioner. So I attended, and that's when we started talking about it. And it's kind of, I haven't done any like the RSS feeds, or I think there's like a QXMD that does that, but I do subscribe to like a couple newsletters and a couple like journals, or they'll send us stuff like JAMA and the Physical Therapy Journal. But what I've been doing before this kind of in service was I follow all my favorite scientists on Twitter, and we can kind of get into the discussion of social media and that kind of stuff later. But that's kind of what I've been doing, and even just doing that, I do feel overwhelmed. And I don't know, you guys, I mean, are really busy too. You know, everyone wants to like talk to you guys or sign up for your guys' classes, and you guys are full-time, you know, clinicians. How do you guys fit that in your schedules?
I block time off purposely for it. But I also feel overwhelmed quite a bit of the time. So this is not just feelings that you're having, Nate. I promise you. I can't speak for John or Jared or anybody else, but I feel overwhelmed as well, with the just surplus of information that's out there. But having said that, I feel much less overwhelmed if even I'm always going to be behind. We're always going to be behind the latest paper, right? You're never going to be on top of all the evidence. All right, I'm caught up now on the 12 systematic reviews that just came out a minute ago. Literally, I think there's 12 a minute. But if you block out a little bit of time throughout the week, like that's scheduled. It's scheduled time. And it doesn't, if it's a topic that you're working on, or if we're clinicians and it's a topic that we need to find, that's great. But you feel less overwhelmed if you're chipping away at things. And like the community helps too, because I have people who help keep me up to date with the stuff that's coming out, so that's not just me. And I have people who have read things that I haven't read that can give synopses, and we can have these conversations. So we definitely feel overwhelmed, but I think it helps to use these tools. You mentioned QXMD. Mm-hmm. I use that, and it's a little different than subscribing to a journal who sends you the email of their like new edition of the journal, like the monthly edition, gives you all of the articles in the journal, which I also do that for quite a few, JOSPT, Journal of Strength and Conditioning, and British Journal of Sports Med. You can do it for pretty much any journal. You can get their email newsletter, which is good. I would recommend doing that. But QXMD and also PubMed, they allow you customized searches. So I can say, I want you to send me an email every time an article comes out with ACL in the title, or workload, or whatever you want, injury, rehab, pain, any of that stuff. So you can start to get specific with the topics and the papers that are sent to you, which really, really helps. And I love, you mentioned following the authors on Twitter. I love that. I think Twitter's really good about that because it's short. You can't give a whole bunch of nonsense. Yeah. You know, that's kind of lends itself to that. So you can follow your favorite authors on Twitter, and they're usually just right to the point. Here's an idea. Here's a new paper. Boom, boom, boom. You can also follow the journals. The British Journal of Sports Med is on Twitter. All the APTA is on Twitter. So those are great resources. I also follow the authors on ResearchGate and Google Scholar. So whoever it is, your favorite author, you can go ahead and name them. Mike Raymond, we had him on the podcast. Yeah. I follow. You can Google Mike Raymond's name on Google Scholar. It'll take you to the citations page of Mike, and you can press follow, and you'll get an email for every paper that he publishes. You can do the same thing. Yeah, it's really cool. You can do the same thing on ResearchGate, and you can filter their publications by year. So it's real nice. I've been doing that a lot more by author, because generally an author that you follow is also putting out research that you're interested in.
Right.
Do you guys have any other tips, tricks, suggestions on that stuff?
No, you touched on the ones that I would have mentioned myself. Quinn's approach is more structured than mine. I don't have time blocked off for reading at the moment, just with a few things up in the air, but that's something that I definitely want to move towards. And by virtue of just being involved with Clinical Athlete and somehow making it a thing where I appear on this podcast and say words, I also feel like I need to be on my game, just as it's a necessity now. So that's forcing me to do more reading, in the last year than it has been, or than I have prior to that. And Also, speaking to what Quinn said about having a community to help keep you up to date, this is where I really find the forum also helpful. I know John touched on that before, and we can, as you said, Nate, we can talk about social media in a minute, but I find that having a group of people who I know are really smart, to sort of disseminate little pieces of information or put up excerpts from given papers, or to start a thread on a given topic. Like Quinn, you were going through that tendinopathy thread in the forum with John Hodges and Jason Ewer, and going through that, it sort of, I was able to flag a few papers that I wanted to go back and then read myself. It was kind of a, not a Cole's Notes, but just these were things that mattered to these people who I know to be quite intelligent and whom I respect. So I'm going to go check that out, and then maybe check the reference list from there, and then highlight a couple more papers and then fit that in. So that's kind of how I'm doing things these days.
The tendinopathy thing on the forum is a real brain melter if anybody wants to check it out.
Yeah.
That's a really good one. I want to touch a little bit on people being able to give you a brief synopsis. We have a lot of people in our circle that through Instagram stories or Twitter pictures or whatever you want to use will highlight research. And one of the things I think a lot of, especially young clinicians, do is they're afraid to shoot a message over to that person and ask them a question. Hey, well, like, what is your interpretation of this? What does this mean? So that they can get you started and at least assist in that. There's some, obviously the first person that comes to mind for me is Mike Amato. But there's a bunch out there that would love to help and help people along. So don't be afraid to ask those questions. When it comes to structured time for reading, I'm a fat power lifter and I read during my rest sets because my rest intervals are long. Especially now that I've been reined in with my rest intervals a little bit by the guy coaching me. So that is where I kind of get a lot of my structured reading in or listening. And then I don't just consume scientific literature, but we've been forced into reading a little bit of books and other things and consuming that level of media that is a little outside of my comfort zone. So I use my commute to and from work and use audible.com quite a bit to consume that sort of literature. So you're not always going to be able to find time. Sometimes you got to be creative and squeeze it in. I wish I could be like Benjamin Franklin and Quinn and block out time, but it doesn't always happen. So sometimes you have to be creative.
Have you guys heard of the book called Deep Work?
I've not.
Yep.
Yeah. So my professor was telling me about that book, and that's like next up on my reading list. But yeah, that's just about like how to block off time. I don't know. Quinn, you read it, or have you read it?
It's good. Yeah. I listened to it on Audible. I don't know if I'm allowed to say I read it if I listened to it on Audible, but yeah,
everyone does.
It's a good one. It's a good book. Yeah, that would be good. It's good on the topic of how important it is to dive into a topic and only that topic, even if it's just, and then you might think like deep work, oh, it's like you're caving yourself up for 8 hours or something or an entire weekend. And when you have a family, which, I don't have any kids, and Jared and John, you're corralling all these little critters. And so like time is it's much
accurate.
Different, And so I'm like, oh yeah, I block off time to read research. I also don't have children to tend to. So it's a little different. But in the book, it was all about no matter how much time you have or how little time you have, generally somebody can find a pocket of time, regardless of how long it is. And then it's how important it is to just be in the moment of that thing. And like plan all your distractions away for that time, and you dig into that, to whatever it is that you're digging into. And ultimately that's the premise of the book. I would definitely read it. It's a good read. The Distracted Mind is another one along the same lines. It's same deal of how, especially in today's day and age, how we're so literally distracted. We don't dive into anything very deeply. And it's not really about the time that you spend on it. It's the quality of the time. So for sure, those are good books. Social media is an interesting topic, huh?
Yeah. Talking about distractors, social media,
Right.
good transition.
Well, and it's like, I'll feel like a hypocrite because obviously clinical athlete, social media is a big part of what we do. But I think relying on social media, Instagram, Facebook, whatever it is, Twitter, as a means of education is a real slippery slope.
Yeah.
Especially in the beginning when you're trying to create a contextual environment for a topic or just for a field in general. As a student, I think it's good to follow these people that you respect and want to learn from, but then you dig into the actual resources deeper than simply reading the posts and then taking that as is. Because even research papers are limited in the amount of scope. Imagine an Instagram post. What do you guys think about social media pros and cons of learning? Keeping up with the literature,
We're going to be here all day.
Do you want to take first stab at it, Nate?
Sure. So I love social media. It's like there's a lot of content on social media, and I think it's great, and I don't think anything is inherently bad. But yeah, there's just not a lot of filters on social media. But at the same time, man, I don't know. It's great for like discussion. It's great for community. I think with like the clinical athlete community's presence on social media, it helps with accountability. If we kind of skipped over something, I feel like we're not afraid to call each other out or ask questions or have a little discussion on social media. So I think it's great. There's one thing that stood out to me in the presentation was the fact that there's a lot of like echo chambers in social media, and it's easy to kind of get in your little silo and not really like look at what else is out there. If someone disagrees, you're just like, they're nonsense. I'm not even going to pay attention to them. And we just kind of get, in our little like area, and we're like, oh yeah, like what he said or what she said, and so yeah, I think it's great, but there's a slippery slope, like Quinn said.
Mm-hmm. I find the temptation, before I get to the temptation of social media, I find it really useful because even though I'm working on the habit, I still find myself mindlessly scrolling every now and then, more frequently than that implies. And, if I'm going through my stories or going through the different posts, because of some of the people that I follow and associate with now, who are regularly throwing up these excerpts or these abstracts, it ends up in front of my face. And then if I find it really interesting, I might make a mental note or take a screenshot and come back to it later. The temptation has been to leave it at that, or to leave it at the little snippet from the story, or the 5 stories that they strung together, and think that I have a good understanding of it. Because Quinn, like you said, there's a humongous drop off of context, just as it's communicated through that particular medium. So now I have to make it a point to make sure that I read it firsthand. I think it's kind of nice to whet the appetite, or as a little sort of preview, or maybe to just even point me in a different direction that I didn't know I wanted to head. But then I have to follow through and read the stuff myself.
I have a really hard time not saying bad things about social media. Yeah, the toughest thing for me about social media is what it has turned into, at least in my opinion, from being around for the inception of Facebook, like the very beginning, is now it is a marketing platform, number one. And that comes with benefits and it comes with drawbacks. And one of the drawbacks is that you have a lot of appeal to authority fallacy going on, depending on how popular an individual is.
Mm-hmm.
It creates small feeding grounds of supporters that create a pretty stout echo chamber that cannot be challenged. And those biases continue to grow and develop and entrench people in a thought process that may or may not be healthy, regardless of the topic that we're talking about. Also, the speed of it makes things very difficult to actually vet out. So there's been plenty of things that we've seen, not just on social media, but in our own news networks about nutrition and exercise. Any topic you want to think about, where they take a study and they extrapolate some wild conclusion because a singular study said something, and now all of a sudden we have a whole nother vein of misinformation, which makes things very, very difficult to contend with when it comes to how do we manage social media in a positive manner and get people to follow suit. Because there is a lot of pressure. There can be a lot of reward through social media. I think plenty of people have illustrated that at this point, that if you put up inflammatory posts or things that are eye-catching, for us, we always talk about the big red check mark and the big red X and the big green check mark, and throwing them in the trash. But, those are eye catchers, especially on things like Instagram, which tends to be a big business driver for people. With that said, you can put out some really good quality information if you can find a way to get context across to people in a digestible manner. It's just the quality control is lacking. Mm-hmm. And that's where I struggle with social media. And I'll stop there.
You could tie that into the Dunning-Kruger effect really, really easily there, because, you throw out some piece of information, be it accurate or misinformation, and then suddenly millions of people know about it and think that they know it all. And that can be difficult to refute, as we talked about in a forthcoming episode about correcting misinformation. Mm-hmm. And then also to speak to your point, John, about how fast-paced it is. Quinn, you've spoken about this a bunch of times, how you might try to engage somebody in a conversation and or debate, and you throw up 3 references or 2 references, and then 2 minutes.
Where'd Jared go?
I don't know.
He's searching for
that being the reason why
Jared,
traffic in. Oh,
we lost.
Backtrack for a second.
Hold on.
Oh,
say you might have thrown up 3 references, and then 2 minutes later, boom.
Gotcha.
2 minutes later, what? What happens 2 minutes later?
Tune in next week.
Cliffhanger.
Then 2 minutes later, they're coming back and saying, "Yeah, but what about this, this, and this?" And they can't have read what you've asked them to read. Pew, pew. And you've made this point is, yeah, exactly. You've made this point about that being the reason why traffic in the forum is a lot slower, just because people are going to take the time to comb through what you put up there and thoughtfully craft a response. And I think that's important.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead, Nate.
Well, I was just going to say that's what kind of separates like social media from the forum, is that there's trolls on social media, and, like on Twitter, you'll see like a discussion, or even on Instagram and like the comments, you'll see a discussion and you're like, oh, this is kind of cool. And then like some guy will like insert some, inflammatory comment. And you're like, that had nothing to do with anything. And it was really funny. It made me think of this post that Greg Lehman posted about, being a move optimist, and, there's no, good or bad movement without context. And this guy's all like, oh, so I should just flop around like a butterfly. And he's like, yes, there's no other way to interpret what I just said.
Yeah. Well, on Instagram, you can't even link anything.
Yeah.
So it's really just going to be a contest, as they say, measuring contest, or, but, and on Facebook, you can link, obviously, but I mean, I know a select few who will be in a Facebook conversation and say, thank you for providing me these links. I'm going to come back in a day or two, and I'm going to read these papers, come back in a day or two, and come back. Like, I've seen that happen, but it's very rare. It's more common of exactly what Jared said. Somebody links a paper and then the other person comes right back with their rebuttal. Oh yeah, but this, and this. Did you read the paper? No, I looked at the abstract, or maybe they probably didn't even click the link. So I don't think social media lends itself to discussion in which the parties actually want to learn. And I think what it does is it lends itself to people worrying about how smart they look to the other people involved. And in a more private platform like a forum, you filter out the people who actually want to learn, because when you post a response in the forum, not a whole lot of people see it. And you're posting that response to actually have a discussion, to actually get something out of it, as opposed to posting a response on Facebook so that the whole world can see how good of a rebuttal you came up with, or how fast, how quickly you were able to put the other person down, something like that. That's the evolution that I've seen. I learned a ton from forums. When I was a young strength and conditioning coach, like 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, there were like 5 different forums that I was a part of, and I was in those things every single day. And I owe so much to that type of platform. And that was, to me, social media back then. And it's just very much evolved. So it's easier if you already have a context to a field or a topic, and then I think your natural filter is a little bit better. But it's hard when you're newer to the field or a topic, and you don't know. Have you guys ever followed somebody or thought somebody was an authority on a subject, and then talked to other people and they were like, yeah, that guy's an idiot, or yeah, she doesn't know what she's talking about, and you're like, what? That was like my hero. Yeah. Or like I thought that was the person for this thing, and then
Foo Fighters right now.
Yeah. And then you're kind of like, oh God. And then that's happened to me so many times. I think it's a good thing, but on social media, I think it's just magnified. There's so many little wars going on. I can't keep track of the beefs that are happening here and there. And it gets more overwhelming to me keeping up with social media than keeping up with research.
Right. I mean,
I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah. I was just gonna. Sorry.
Go ahead, Nate.
Go ahead. I was just gonna ask if you guys have ever seen someone like change their mind or say like, "Oh, you're right," that kind of stuff on social media.
Okay.
So I have. It's rare.
It's rare.
Really?
Yeah, it's rare. Mm-hmm. But this again harkens back to the Misconceptions podcast. But did any of you guys check out the Joe Rogan Experience with Gary Taubes and Stefan
Guyenet? Yeah, Guyenet.
Yeah. So obviously Gary is big on some alternative nutrition theory, and Stefan came in with an army of research behind him. The problem is if you go through the comment section, Stefan came across as a real jerk, and it lost a ton of people, even people who were on the fence. And that's where I find a lot of dangers with social media. You might not change the mind of the individual that you're discussing the thing with, right? So your opposition. But you have to be cognizant of all the people watching, of all the people who are on the fence, who might not really have made a decision yet. And 9 times out of 10, they're going to go for the person who came across as not being a jerk. And that's actually really hard to do on social media, because a lot of it is just based off the biases of the individual reading whatever it may be and all that. I've rarely seen people change their mind in regards to the opposition who is entrenched, but I've seen followers of that individual change their mind because a case was respectfully presented.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to answer your question, Nate, I've also seen it, also rarely. There's one instance that comes to mind, and I won't name names, but I was privy to some direct messages that went back and forth between a friend of mine and someone who was fairly prominent. The friend had critiqued one of these stories or these posts that had come up in their own story, and the prominent person had messaged them back in a fairly confrontational way. And so my friend had asked if I wanted to weigh in on her response, and so we did. And of course, this is just observation, and I can't draw any sort of causal link between the two events. But in subsequent posts from the prominent person, the information seems to be significantly more accurate, or things that I can get behind more. Whereas prior to that, there was some good stuff, but there were some other things that I just couldn't. It couldn't make me double tap that post. Just I wouldn't feel okay about it. So it's gotten better, and I'd like to think that exchange, even though it didn't really end fantastically in the direct messages, may have had a lasting impact on that prominent person. But again, I'm speculating.
I think it takes repeated bouts. If somebody's going to change their mind about something, it doesn't happen with one discussion or one post. Oh, you're right. And now my 3 years of preconceived beliefs are changed now. Thank you. And John, to your point, I think not only sounding like an asshole can put people off, but just firing off, like dumping a bunch of PubMed links into a post in a way, exactly. It's exactly right. In a way where the person, you dump so many URLs there, you don't want them to read. You just want them to concede. And I think that's just as bad, because you can have, like you said, you can have a valid argument. That's not how to win people over. And it's also, are you going into a discussion to win? If that's your motivation, then that may not be the best motivation to have if we're all trying to kind of push the same thing, which is let's all learn from each other. I, at this point, really shy. I try not to scroll because I get caught up in stuff, and it's just like, it's so hard not to do. But if I ask for a reference, it at this point in time, they send me, if they send me a reference, I say thank you, and I probably don't return to the conversation, because I wasn't asking for a reference to have a debate. I was asking for a reference to try to learn something new. Maybe they're right. I already come in with my biases and these types of things. So 9 times out of 10, I see their reference, and in my mind, I'm like, that's junk. But I'm not going to come back. That doesn't support your claim. The data is horrible, etc. But I usually don't jump back into the conversation, because the likelihood of that singular person changing their mind based on that one thing is nil anyway, and it's just brain energy that I could be using on something else. I do think injury. It's a brain injury too. It's minor, but it accumulates. You're a concussion specialist, right, Jared? Help me every time.
We'll talk.
And so, but I do think people change their mind over time. And obviously we've all evolved. We're not talking about that necessarily, but a real shift in a thought process. I've seen it happen in the Clinical Athlete Forum now over the past 3 years. I've seen individuals who came in with a completely different lens change their views over time. And I've talked to these people, and it's painful. Like, it's not an easy thing. And it's happened to me. I went into PT school wanting to be a different type of clinician than the one that I want to be now. But I think it takes time. And I also think, just like we can't help everybody, all our patients, like we can't save everybody, we also can't change everybody's minds. And we shouldn't want to either. Because we're probably both wrong. Both sides are always wrong. So,
I just lost 2 more listeners.
Yeah. We can all save our energy and our emotional energy for other things that are more important, and just try to learn as much as we can. One thing I was going to say about studies, I am pretty big on the data and being able to interpret the actual results. I think that's important to have a context of what's truly happening in the study, especially when the conclusions of the authors don't necessarily match up with the data. But even if you know nothing about statistics or data and you don't want to, you can always just ask a simple question, which is, how else could we explain these results? Because that's what a research article really is about. It's trying to create a more realistic representation of what the real world is supposed to be like, to some extent. And there's always confounding factors, and you can never control for every variable. So the results of the study are the results, but perhaps there's other factors that could have played a part. And that's one way that you can appraise research without knowing anything about statistics or anything like that. It's just how else could these results be explained? And those could lead to more research questions. Oh, maybe this confounding factor had something to do with the results. I wonder if there's any literature on that. And then you can kind of start to open up your knowledge of the topic that way as well. I don't have a segue into anything else. I'll just stop talking.
No, in one of my classes, we like my professor, his name is Terry Grindstaff, but he was like talking about like natural history. He gets in front of the class and he's all like, so you have a patient who comes in with low back pain and he gets better in 3 weeks. Like, why? And then everyone's saying like, oh, treatment and that kind of stuff. And obviously like, it's like, we looked at like there was like this table in the slides and it was talking about like clinical outcomes, and it's talking about natural history, placebo, Hawthorne effect, and like the actual treatment. And I think that's just like a good way to like look at like literature. Is like, how else, like what else could be contributing to this that maybe the authors are missing, or and the authors might even talk about it in the discussion, like we didn't look at psychosocial factors, or we didn't look at rate of force development, or X, Y, and Z. So yeah, I think that's a great point.
And that's not even a fault. Like you said, it's not a fault of the authors necessarily. Research articles are limited to the population and the outcomes that they're looking at. So that's just that's just a piece of science in general, is one study is one piece of the pie. So how else can you explain the results? Is just another way of saying, what does the rest of the body of literature say compared to the results of this study?
So when you guys like search for like literature, how do you guys go about doing that?
So do we have, what's the context? Am I looking for, do I have an idea in mind? Do I have a question? Am I looking for a specific something for my patient in particular, or is it just a topic that I'm interested in, or both?
Yeah, I was going to say patient first, and then like a topic you're interested in, or like if you're reading a paper and you have more questions and you're going to look to the literature to answer those questions, like how are you going to do that?
For me personally, I usually look for the most recent systematic review on the subject, not because the systematic review itself is the highest quality, but because it is hopefully the most current appraisal, or it's going to give me all the articles up to this point within that systematic review. So the data in the systematic review is one thing, but at least I'll have a lot of the articles on the topic in front of my face right there. Like the systematic review almost does the searching for me, if that makes sense. Now, there may be more than one. You could have 3 systematic reviews on the exact same topic that come out in the same year, because they all have different inclusion criteria, slightly different methodology that they're looking at. Maybe one's a meta-analysis where the inclusion criteria of another didn't allow for meta-analysis, something like that. So they could be different. But it's nothing fancy. I usually go into PubMed or Google Scholar and or ResearchGate, and I just start typing keywords just like that. And I look for the systematic review first. And then if I don't find anything, I filter by year first. And I'll scroll down and just look for older articles. If that's not the case, if I don't find any SRs, then it's just any article on the topic. If I find nothing on the topic on any of those, which is rare, because like the question must be real obscure, then then that's where my friends come in, or the forum. Yeah. What do you guys got?
I do more or less the same thing. Usually it's PubMed or Google Scholar, and just type in keywords and go from there. I hadn't thought of targeting the systematic review first as a general rule, though, so I think I might start doing that.
Yeah, I do pretty much the same thing. If I can find a systematic review and then kind of dive into the reference list, and that's a good thing. And I do, one of my first places to go to is the research request area in the CA forum, or just search it there, because typically there's either some sort of discussion that can give me a little base knowledge, or a ton of articles already sitting in there.
Right. And I think a cool thing about PubMed is, like, if you see a paper, so if I'm like looking at a subject, like recently I was looking at, like, I'm doing like a project on rate of force development, and I'm looking at like peak strain on an ACL. So like I'll find a paper, and it's like, so on PubMed, and what on the side it's on PubMed, it'll be like this similar articles. And then that's something I can look into, or like this paper, if it was an older paper. So there's one I was looking at in 2007 that looked at like the time when someone like tears the ACL when they contact the floor, and it was like in 2007. And I'm like, I kind of want something newer or more. So I'll look at like what paper cited this article, and that's something I do. Or I'll read the intro. I'm like, oh, what else? What do these authors know that I don't? Maybe
the similar articles too in PubMed is a great resource. I'm glad you said that. That's an awesome one. You can just start plugging. We'll keep answering the question based on like no time constraints. You're working on a project or you're working on a question. Everything is perfect. You got all the time in the world, and you just want to get the most articles on the subject. That's a great way to do it. The systematic review is another great way, because they're all kind of lumped there together. But also just the references in general. So I'll tell you what I do. A lot of people still print out their articles, because I like reading on paper. Sometimes I'll do that, but to save paper, a lot of times I'll read it on my computer, but I'll open up 2 copies of the article in PDF on my desktop. One copy on the left I'm actually reading through. The other copy is just on the reference list at the end of the article. And so as I go through, and I have a piece of paper and a pen right by me too. So as I'm reading through the article, and they say something in the introduction of, and we know, and past research has shown this, and they have like 2 through 4 references. So that's 3 articles right there on the topic that I would maybe help me, give me a better, broader understanding of things. I'll go right over to the other copy, and I'll make note. I'll look at the title of those references and see if they are something that I would want to look into, and I'll just make a quick note on the piece of paper. I won't go cross-reference yet, because then I'll never end up reading the actual article. But as I'm going through, when I finally finish the article, I have these notes of these clustered references on specific kind of subtopics that I can now kind of go dive into. Now this shit blows up real quick, because you end up with references on references on references, and every time you go and pull some other paper, that gives you 5 more references to read. So like, that's a personal problem, and you got to put the brakes on at some point. And I have a real issue, like at the end of a project or at the end of the day working on something, it's possible that I have like 50 tabs open, just 3 lists of references, and I've read 2 papers. You know what I mean? So you've got to like try to actually make up ground. But that's one way to do it is the references of the paper that you're reading can really, really, really help, even though they're older. And I know you made a note of there, seeing an older article, you're like, well, maybe I want something newer. That's true, but it doesn't discount older research, because
it doesn't expire.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Totally. Mm-hmm. And I don't think a lot of people read primary literature, and those are usually even older, articles from the 70s, 80s, and 90s that are kind of the first ones. And I'm kind of a historian on this stuff. I like to know how an idea originated, and it gives me just a better context of learning about where we are now. That's just me, though, and
I was going to say this earlier, but I do want to make a plug for the Clinical Athlete Forum, because, and the Journal Club, because, I have the slides pulled up next to me, but we were talking about echo chambers and stuff like that, and I really did like, was it Kevin McNamara? I don't know how to say his last name. Sorry if I mispronounced it, but he brought the idea of, hey, when we do our journal club next, we should try to do something that maybe doesn't fit our bias. So I think, like, it couldn't be an echo chamber, but I think realizing that like Kevin did, we're trying to shift the discussion into something that maybe challenges us, So I think if you're not on the Clinical Athlete forum, you should probably join. And if you're a student, I don't know. I had a student message me and she's all like, yeah, what's it like for a student? And I'm like, I think it's great. I'm like more of like a fly on the wall, listening on the discussions, but I think it's a great resource and totally worth it.
I appreciate the plug, man.
I think a lot of us started off as flies on the wall. And then just as you get more, as you read more and you see more and you start to get more comfortable, I think that's part of the personal growth that sort of thing allows. Because then you do decide to step out of your comfort zone a little bit and say something and then get hit with like 3 more articles about what you said is wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, you grow real quick that way.
No, it's actually a really positive experience, and I've never had a bad experience on there. So, and especially with the Journal Club, being able to help, I don't know, develop that, have fruitful discussions, really kind of dive into picking some of this research apart and understanding it a little bit better has been really good for me, and it's made me, I don't know, as an older clinician, feel like the positive impact can be made, because it's really difficult, especially when you're in school, to keep up with it, and when you're out of school, it's even worse. So it's a great platform to learn a lot from. So.
Yeah, and the echo chamber is a good point, because we don't all have to agree on stuff. I think that's a misconception too. We always say that Clinical Athlete is a community of like-minded clinicians and students, but like-minded doesn't mean we all agree on every point. There's a difference there.
Yeah.
And there's also a difference between what I believe and what I think is more correct versus that should be what everybody thinks because I think
right.
it. And then hopefully there's a distinction there. Because I think that we can all be evidence informed and not all have the same approach or do the exact same things, which is kind of counterintuitive, but our interpretation of science is just that.
Yeah. And I think if we all agreed on something, there would be no discussion, and I think that's a huge learning opportunity and a good way to grow as a clinician and just as a thinker is to have discussions. And so, yeah, that would be terrible if everyone agreed on everything,
Well, we wouldn't need anything. We would be good. We wouldn't need any of this stuff. We'd have it all figured out.
We wouldn't have a Clinical Athlete podcast and yeah.
The only thing I can really agree with anybody on anymore is that there's a whole lot I don't know.
Yeah. At this point, I'm just comfortable with asking the patient what they want to do for fun, and if it's something that I can help with, then I'll try to help. or what helps. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I was going to say something more important, like, you have goals of like actually helping to live your life better, but fun is helping to live your life better if you're not enjoying it.
There you go.
Cool. I think it was a good topic. Nate, thanks for coming on, and thanks for the idea.
Yeah, thanks for answering some of my questions, and yeah, I'm hoping everyone else who listens to it learns from it.
No, I think it's going to be really, really helpful, and these are not just student thoughts and student problems. We're all students, it's just a title. If you're out of school, you're no longer a quote unquote student, but we have the same overwhelming feelings, and we feel like we're behind, and the more we learn, the more we don't know. All those things are completely normal. I'm not sure they go away. I think maybe you just get more comfortable with the uncertainty. And even within that, there are periods of time where you're less comfortable. It's just like that. It's just like training. The overall trend is in the right direction, but within there is some peaks and valleys where you're like, existential crisis here. Like, what do I do? Like, you have tendinopathy. Does the tendon respond to load, or does it? Can we even change it? I don't know. It's like, I don't know what to do.
It's every other week.
And then just have them do some squats or something. What the hell is wrong with you?
Put them on the K-box.
Yeah, there you go. Go to failure. You don't feel a thing. Cool. Well, Nate, where can people connect with you?
Yeah, so talking about social media again, I'm really active on Instagram and on Twitter. My handle on Instagram is that one DOOD7. It's that one dude 7. I gotta change that. I'm gonna change that. Don't worry.
It's bad when every time you say it, you're embarrassed.
I know,
You smiled last time too, so you got to at this point you have to change it. You don't have to change it if you're proud of it. If you say it with say it with your chest. But if you have to smirk and like you're a little wishy-washy, you should probably fix it.
Yeah, I know. It's what? Just if you're gonna find me on Instagram, just look up Nate Wong PT, and you'll probably see something pop up. And on Twitter, my handle is all I see is golf. So
there you go.
That's where I'm most active on.
What's your handicap?
My handicap, I'm about scratch, but we just had a really long winter, so I don't know.
So you forgot everything?
Yeah, everyone tells me that lifting is terrible for golf. I'm getting muscle and it's gonna mess with my swing, and that drives me crazy.
You gotta just make sure your glutes fire. You don't want to be like Tiger.
Yeah. Yeah, I gotta go do some core stuff before I go hit the links.
Cool. Well, thanks for being on, man. We
my
appreciate
pleasure.
it.
Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah. John, Jared.
It was a good topic.
Yeah, always a pleasure.
Yeah, no problem.
We'll talk soon. See you on the internet.
See you guys. Yeah, see you on social media.